Alright friends, Waydoo owners, Waydoo EVO owners, I have a very important tip to share with you in regards to mounting the mast to your EVO board. And so, if you'll come over and look inside the mast hole with me, I first want you to notice that inside this hole here, you'll see this gray material. It's kind of a rubbery material. You'll see it has lots of give. It's very springy, very rubbery. And this material is going to push against the mast. It's going to resist you screwing down the mast into the board. And also, depending on whether you're on a flat surface or a surface with an incline, it will also tend to resist against the pull of the screws. So you need to keep this in mind as you're tightening the mast, because it's extremely important that you tighten the mast all the way, regardless of what kind of screws you have. Today we are using the screws that require an Allen key versus the thumb screws, and that's because I feel like I can get more leverage and I feel more confident getting them as tight as they need to be with the Allen key. But if you feel confident enough to get them as tight as they need to be shown in this video with the thumb screws, then you may use the thumb screws. So we're gonna put the mast in, and we're actually sloped a little bit downhill, and I'll feel comfortable leaving the mast like this because the weight of the motor, most of the weight is back here, and if we were on flat ground or the other way around, this motor and the mast might fall out of the hole just sitting still because of the slope and or the weight of the motor. So you do not want to leave the mast unattended depending on the slope of your environment that you're setting up on. And then you can see that already, just sitting the way it is, the mast is not, I can't even push it all the way down with the force of my hands because of the pressure of that rubber and the foam inside. So we're gonna get our two screws or bolts, and we're gonna put them in. They're the same length. You'll actually notice that the bolts for the stabilizer and the bolts for the mast are the same length. And you'll have a sticker on the other side that will tell you what kind of bolts you should be using. And you should be using two M620 bolts. So these are M620 bolts. And first, you want to make sure that the mast is totally up and down or perpendicular with the board, and the mast head here is also, parallel with the board, so that you can easily start the screws. If they don't easily start with just a simple twist of the thumb and the index finger or the pointer finger, then they're probably cross-threading. So you need to hold the mast so that the screws will go in very easily with just a simple twist of the thumb and the finger. And you want to get each of them until they're starting to resist. And so starting each of your screws, whether it's the mast, the stabilizer wing, the front wing, it's nice to tighten everything down together. So tighten a little bit one side, tighten a little bit the other side. And again, you may need to hold the mast so that it's not leaning one way or the other, making it harder to screw down the bolts. So I kind of like to tighten the bolts as much as I can with this end, and then at the very end I'll go back and I'll tighten things with the end that has more leverage. Because of the weight of the motor, the lean of the mast depending on the slope of the terrain you're setting up on, and the pushback of the spongy rubber and foam inside the board, you may think that you've tightened it all the way down depending on the strength of your hand. But what you need to check for is the perimeter of the mast head here. You need to make sure that it is flush, if not even slightly below the framework around the board. And so you'll actually feel the bolts stop. And so I'm going with the the end that has the more leverage, and you'll feel it stop. You may think that you're putting too much pressure and stripping them, but you'll feel it stop. And again, you can put your finger here and you'll feel that it's flush, or even the head itself is slightly lower than the framework of the mast. There might be some slight inconsistencies board to board, but you want to feel that it's at least flush or lower. You want to feel the bolts stop, and that's going to make sure that these don't loosen during a ride. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on this front bolt in particular versus the rear bolt because of the push of the water against the mast. And I actually had a situation where this front bolt came loose during a ride, and I was using the thumb screws, and I thought they would have stopped against this little bolt that's right here sticking up. So the thumb screws would normally stop there, but something must have happened where maybe the thumb screw popped off. I don't know, but somehow that front bolt came loose and the entire mast bent backwards, and it was held on by only the one bolt. Luckily, nothing was damaged. The mast still worked, the battery still worked despite the exposure to the water. But all these tips are just to help you to recognize and understand these little intricacies here to ensure that everything is totally as tight as it can be, because all of this weight, we're looking at, what is it, like almost like around 20 pounds. It's being held on by just these two bolts, so you want to ensure that they're tight. And then there's a rubber piece on the other side of the board that we'll show later. There is an Allen key in it, and if you're out in the middle of the water far away from the shore, you can use that Allen key, that hex key, as a emergency tool to tighten things. If you want to double check things in the middle of the ride and you notice something's loose, you can use that tool to tighten things out in the middle of the water if necessary. As for the wing bolts, this is more the place where I like to get it as tight as I can with the short end, and then I'll go to the long leverage end, and then I'll give it a little bit extra turn, like an extra quarter turn. And each person and their hand size and their hand strength is going to be different, so you can kind of decide what is going to be the right amount of tightness based on you and your experience and your circumstances and your hand size and your hand strength. As I mentioned earlier, the rubber piece that covers the front side of the battery has an Allen key that is hidden inside right here. So just make sure you don't drop it in the middle of the lake, and then make sure that you put it all the way back in so that it's right there snug and it's not gonna just fall out. I've never had one fall out yet, and I've been riding this board for several months. But I've also never had to use it out in the middle of the water yet. This is the mast and board of the previous Flyer 1 Plus model, and if you've had experience with this model or even other boards, then you may not be used to having the type of resistance on the bolts when bolting on the mast from your previous experience. So you can see that the mast head and the hole is different. We don't have that gray rubbery material inside, and when we put the mast in, you can see that it's already flush. It sits all the way down inside the board. Now, one of the reasons I think they may have added the that rubber inside is just to protect the head of the board and the equipment that's inside, the electronics, provide some vibration dampening, things like that. But you just don't have the same kind of resistance because of the shape of the head, and you may have also remembered that it was like a wall all the way down versus an upside down hat, where the EVO is wider and then it gets narrower. This one is the same, kind of more of a block all the way down into the hole versus an upside down hat. And so these different factors make it fit different even without bolts. There will also be resistance against pushing the battery into the battery box because of these spring-loaded arms here. These spring-loaded arms do two different things. They help to maintain a pressure against the battery, against these locks, so pushing it up against the locks to keep them locked, and it helps to get the battery out as well. Another thing that's going to resist pushing the battery in is just the large gaskets around the terminals, which you will also notice when plugging in the charger as well to the battery.